There is a very specific, hollow sound that a lock makes when it's been changed. It's not just the sound of a key failing to turn. It's the sound of 5 years of unwavering loyalty being erased in a single, sharp, metallic click. My name is Ethan Vance. I'm 42 years old, a former senior contract administrator from Charlotte, North Carolina, and right now, I am standing on a porch in the middle of a freezing November downpour, realizing that the people I saved from the street have just put me on it. I've spent the last 1,125 days making sure this suburban house stayed under the Harrison name. Every single month, without fail, $20,800 left my bank account to cover a mortgage that didn't even have my name on the title. I did it because I believed in the old-fashioned idea of family. I did it because when my wife, Chloe, sat on our bed and cried about her parents, Arthur and Martha, losing their home to foreclosure, I didn't see a financial liability. I saw a moral responsibility. But as I stand here, soaked to the bone, staring at the brass handle that refuses to budge, I'm realizing a devastating truth. To the Harrisons, I wasn't a son-in-law, a provider, or a savior. I was a human bank account, a subscription service they decided to cancel the second the funds ran dry. This story isn't just about a man losing his job. It's about what happens when a man who reads fine print for a living finally decides to write some of his own. Let's go back 5 years. Charlotte is a city built on banking and old-fashioned suburban dreams, and in 2018, the Harrisons were watching theirs dissolve. Arthur was a retired foreman with a pension that didn't quite keep pace with rising property taxes, and Martha had a taste for a lifestyle their bank account couldn't support. They were exactly 2 months away from a foreclosure notice that would have turned their quiet cul-de-sac existence into a public embarrassment. I remember the night Chloe told me. We were sitting in a small bistro in Dilworth, the kind of place where people go to celebrate, not to mourn. But Chloe wasn't eating. She looked at me with eyes that I then believed were the most honest things I had ever seen, and she told me her parents were going to be on the street by Christmas. She didn't ask me for the money directly. She just described their ruin so vividly that as a provider, I felt it was my duty to stop it. I am a senior contract administrator. I live in a world of risk assessment, spreadsheets, and long-term stability. I did the math right there on a paper napkin. The mortgage, the insurance, the back taxes. It came to $2,800 a month. It was a massive hit to our personal savings, a sacrifice that meant no vacations, no new truck, and no luxury for us. But I saw it as an investment in family. I looked at my wife and said, "I'll handle it, every cent, for as long as it takes." For 60 consecutive months, I never missed a beat. While my colleagues were buying vacation homes or upgrading their lives, I was quietly ensuring that Arthur and Martha Harrison didn't lose their dignity. I didn't just pay the bill. I spent my weekends at their house. I fixed their leaky faucets. I painted their siding, and I kept their lawn looking like a magazine cover. I wanted them to feel secure. I thought I was building a safety net of mutual respect and love. I didn't realize I was actually just financing a cage for myself, built with my own labor and signed with my own checks. Stay with me for this one, because this journey isn't just about money. It's about the exact moment you realize the people you called family were just waiting for your bank account to hit zero. If you've ever been the one who carried the load only to be dropped the second you stumbled, this story is for you. Before we get into the cold Friday that changed everything, do me a quick favor. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. The Friday it all came apart didn't start with a storm. It started with a calendar invite. Quick sync, HR Room 4. In the corporate world, those 4 words are a death sentence. I remember the fluorescent lights feeling too bright and the clinical silence of the elevator ride down. After 12 years of exemplary service, I was handed a cardboard box and a folder. My position was being optimized. The first thing I did wasn't panic about my car or my insurance. I thought about the Harrisons. If I didn't have a salary, who was going to pay the $2,800 due on the first of the month? I walked to my truck, hands shaking, and called Chloe. I needed her to tell me we'd figure it out. "Chloe, I just got laid off," I said the second she picked up. There was a silence on the other end that lasted 5 seconds too long. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of a calculation. "What about the mortgage, Ethan?" she asked. "No, are you okay?" "No, we'll be fine. Just the mortgage." "I have a severance, Chloe. It'll cover us for a while," I replied, trying to steady my voice. "A while isn't enough," she said, her voice turning sharp. "My parents can't live with that kind of uncertainty. You promised them security." She hung up. I sat in my truck in the office parking lot, staring at the dash. I thought she was just stressed. I didn't realize she was already coordinating with Arthur and Martha. I didn't realize that in their eyes, an unemployed Ethan was a broken tool, and they had no intention of keeping a broken tool in the house. The optimization of my life had only just begun. I pulled into the driveway of the house on Oakview Terrace at 6:15 p.m. The rain was coming down in gray, heavy sheets, drumming against the roof of my truck like a countdown. The first thing I noticed wasn't the house. It was the 4 black contractor bags sitting on the wet concrete of the garage floor. They looked like trash, but as the headlights hit them, I recognized the corner of my old leather jacket poking through the plastic. My heart didn't just drop. It felt like it had been surgically removed. I walked to the front door, my hand instinctively reaching for my keys. I slid the key into the lock, but it wouldn't seat. I tried again, pushing harder, my knuckles white. Nothing. The cylinder was new, the brass too bright, the mechanism completely indifferent to my existence. I pounded on the door, not out of anger yet, but out of a desperate hope that this was all just some sick, twisted joke. The porch light flickered on. The door opened just a crack, held by the security chain. Martha Harrison stood there, her face set in that same clinical, detached expression I'd seen in her daughter's eyes earlier that day. She didn't look at me with sympathy. She looked at me like I was a solicitor she was about to dismiss. "You shouldn't be here, Ethan," she said, her voice as cold as the November rain. "Martha, my key doesn't work. Why is my stuff in the garage?" My voice cracked and I hated myself for it. "We had to make a decision," she replied, stepping fully onto the porch. Arthur stood behind her, his arms crossed, staring at the floor. "You've lost your job, Ethan. This house requires stability. We can't have the uncertainty of an unemployed man hanging over our heads. It's a liability we can't afford." "A liability?" I gasped. "I've paid every cent of your mortgage for 5 years. I saved this roof." "And we're grateful for that," Martha said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But that was then. This is now. Chloe agrees. She needs space to figure out her future, and she can't do that while carrying your failure." I looked past her into the hallway. Chloe was standing by the stairs. She didn't come forward. She didn't defend me. She just stood there in the shadows, her silence more devastating than any words Martha could have ever spoken. She watched her mother close the door on the man who had sacrificed everything for them, and she didn't even blink. The lock clicked. That same hollow final sound I'd heard in my head. I was officially a stranger in a house I had bought with my own life's blood. I sat in the cab of my Ford F-150, the engine off, the only sound the rhythmic, heavy drumming of rain against the aluminum roof. Through the windshield, the house I had spent 60 months protecting was a blurred silhouette of warm yellow light I was no longer allowed to stand in. I looked at the 4 black contractor bags sitting in the puddles by the garage door. My life, my clothes, my documents, all reduced to plastic bundles because my salary had stopped. The clarity didn't come as a lightning bolt. It came as a cold, steady realization. I started thinking about the invisible work. It wasn't just the $168,000 in mortgage payments. It was the July Saturday I spent on a ladder cleaning their gutters while Arthur watched the game inside. It was the $4,000 I dropped on a new HVAC unit 3 years ago because Martha couldn't bear the humidity, and I wanted her to be comfortable. I had treated their home like a sanctuary I was honored to maintain. They had treated it like a property, and me like a tenant whose lease expired the moment the check bounced. I had been so blinded by the idea of being a good man and a provider that I failed to see I was the only one providing. There was no mutual support. There was no safety net. I was the net, and the second I tore, they didn't try to mend me. They just stepped over the hole and kept walking. Sitting there in the dark, I realized I didn't just lose a house. I lost a version of myself that was a fool. It was time to stop being the bank and start being the administrator I was trained to be. If you're sitting there thinking that this is where I just drive away and let them win, then you don't know me, and you definitely don't know what a senior contract administrator does when he's been breached. This story is about to shift from a tragedy to a technicality. Before I tell you about the meeting that changed the locks back, do me a favor. If you've ever seen someone's true colors the moment the money stopped flowing, hit that like button. Subscribe to our community so you don't miss the fallout. Now, let's talk about the one thing the Harrisons forgot. I read everything. Marcus Thorne is the kind of lawyer who doesn't use 3 words when one sharp legal term will do. His office on South Tryon Street was as sterile as a surgical suite, which was exactly what I needed. I wasn't there for a hug or a shoulder to cry on. I was there for a scalpel. I sat across from him, still wearing the same shirt from the night I was locked out. I handed him a blue weatherproof folder I had rescued from one of the contractor bags in my garage, the only thing I made sure stayed dry. "Ethan," Marcus said, looking at me over his spectacles as he leafed through the contents. "You've been paying their mortgage for 5 years without being on the deed. On the surface, that looks like a gift. And in North Carolina, gifts are notoriously hard to claw back." "Keep reading, Marcus," I said, my voice steady, reflecting the cold precision of my training. "Check the addendum under Private Lending and Maintenance Agreement. I'm a senior contract administrator. I don't give gifts. I facilitate transactions. I had them sign that 5 years ago before I sent the first wire transfer." As Marcus flipped to the back, I watched his face change. He stopped at the page with the notary seal. He read it once, then again, a slow grin spreading across his face, a grin that didn't have a single drop of mercy in it. "You had them sign a promissory note and a deed of trust, tied to every individual bank transfer as a secured interest?" "Every single one," I replied. "They thought they were just signing standard paperwork so the mortgage company would talk to me. They didn't read the fine print because they thought I was too family-oriented to ever enforce it. They saw my kindness as a weakness. I saw it as a contingency." Then Marcus dropped the real bomb. He'd done a quick title search before I arrived. "Ethan, you're not the only one making moves. Arthur and Martha Harrison listed that property 4 days ago. They're asking $675,000. They've already got 2 backup offers." The air in the room turned ice cold. They weren't just kicking me out because I lost my job. They were kicking me out because the house had appreciated, and they wanted to cash in on the equity I had spent 5 years protecting. They wanted to sell the house, take the $600,000, and leave me with nothing but trash bags. They thought they were walking away with a windfall. They didn't realize they were walking into a legal wall I had been building brick by brick for 60 months. The mortgage service agreement wasn't just a document. It was a structural stress test. In my line of work, you never assume a structure will hold just because it looks solid. You plan for the exact moment it fails. 5 years ago, when the Harrisons were sobbing about foreclosure, I knew that money changes people. I knew that gratitude has a remarkably short half-life. So, I engineered a safety net, not for them, but for my own investment. The agreement stated clearly that every dollar I paid toward the mortgage, property taxes, and home improvements was not a gift, but a secured interest loan with a 4.5% interest rate, compounded annually. It also included a right of first refusal and a lien against the title. Crucially, it had a default clause. If my residency was terminated without a 90-day written notice, or if the property was listed for sale without my express written consent, the entire balance became due immediately. I sat there with Marcus and did the math on a legal pad. Total mortgage payments, $168,000. New HVAC system I installed in 2021, $6,500. Roof repair and landscaping, $18,000. With the compounded interest and the wrongful termination of tenancy penalties built into the contract, the Harrisons didn't own a $675,000 home. They owned a debt to me that totaled exactly $242,300. "They've committed several counts of non-disclosure in their real estate listing," Marcus noted, tapping his pen against the desk. "They didn't disclose your lien to the buyer's agent because they didn't think a family favor counted as a legal encumbrance. They think family can't sue family." "They're about to learn that a contract doesn't have a heartbeat," I said. "It doesn't care about Christmas dinners or Sunday brunches. It only cares about what was signed. They wanted to treat me like a subscription service they could cancel. Well, it's time for them to realize that the cancellation fee is more than they can afford to pay." I invited them to what I called a final settlement meeting. I insisted we meet at the house on Oakview Terrace. I wanted to be sitting at the very table I had paid for, under the roof I had saved, when the floor fell out from under them. Arthur and Martha sat across from me, looking impatient, while Chloe sat at the end of the table, her eyes fixed on her phone, still refusing to look me in the eye. They looked like people who had already won and were just waiting for me to sign the surrender papers. "We don't have much time, Ethan," Martha said, tapping her polished nails on the wood. "The buyers want to close by the end of the month. We've already packed the rest of your things anyway. Let's just get this over with." "I know about the sale, Martha," I said, my voice low and devoid of any heat. "And I know you're asking $675,000, but there's a small problem with your math." I slid the 47-page document across the table. It wasn't a plea for mercy. It was a legal autopsy. As Arthur put on his reading glasses, I watched the color drain from his face in real time. I pointed to the signature lines from 5 years ago. "You didn't just sign for a mortgage favor, Arthur. You signed a secured interest loan. Every dollar I spent on this property was tracked, notarized, and attached to this title as a lien. With the compound interest and the breach of contract penalties for the lockout, you owe me exactly $242,300. And since you didn't disclose this lien to your buyers, you've technically committed real estate fraud." The silence that followed was absolute. Martha's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Chloe finally looked up, her face a mask of sudden, sharp panic. They had spent weeks planning my exit. They hadn't spent a single second planning for a man who kept receipts. The house wasn't their windfall anymore. It was a debt they couldn't pay. The Harrisons tried to argue, then they tried to cry, and finally they tried to bargain. But as I told them across that kitchen table, a contract doesn't have a heartbeat. It doesn't remember the Sunday brunches or the fake smiles. The house on Oakview Terrace was sold, but after my lien, interest, and legal penalties were satisfied, Arthur and Martha were left with barely enough to rent a small 2-bedroom apartment across town, the kind of uncertainty they were so afraid of when I lost my job. Chloe tried to call me 3 weeks later, her voice soft, talking about misunderstandings and healing. I didn't yell. I didn't even get angry. I just reminded her of the sound of that lock clicking in the rain. I moved into a clean, modern condo in uptown Charlotte. I have a new position now, one with more authority and a better view. The lesson is simple. Loyalty is not a subscription service you can cancel when the funds run dry. If you treat a provider like a human bank account, don't be surprised when the bank closes your account for good. I'm not a liability anymore. I'm a man who finally knows the value of his own signature. If you're listening to this and you're the one currently holding up a structure that's meant to be shared, remember this: a foundation is only as strong as the people standing on it with you. Don't wait for a storm to find out if you're standing alone. Build your own walls, sign your own names, and never apologize for protecting the life you work to create. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and join our community by subscribing for more raw, real family stories. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll see you on the next one.